We begin tonight with President Biden holding his first cabinet meeting after summer break for many in his administration. The president directed those present to implement the many measures recently passed, including the CHIPS bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. Mr. Biden spoke about the positive impact he believes this could have on the economy.
It's proof that democracy can deliver for the people, and there's a foundation of the kind of strong, forward-looking economy that we want to continue to build. The economy with lower prices, more breathing room for middle-class families, an economy with good-paying jobs you can raise a family on.
For more on this and the day's top political stories, let's bring in Ed O'Keefe and Siobhan Hughes. Ed is CBS News' senior White House and political correspondent, and Siobhan is a Capitol Hill reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Thanks to both of you for being here. Ed, I'm going to start with you. As we know, President Biden met with his cabinet today after spending Labor Day campaigning in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Will we see him out on the trail more leading up to November?
We will, and it's a mix of political and official events. Friday, for example, he's going to what's going to be one of the biggest days in Buckeye State history, at least this century. They're breaking ground on a major semiconductor manufacturing plant outside Columbus, Ohio, that's expected to create thousands of jobs, a big accomplishment there for state leaders, but also emblematic of one of the most bipartisan things Washington has done this year, passing that legislation that buoys the nation's semiconductor industry. And today they were announcing plans to start distributing about $50 billion in federal aid to companies that are going to be building these manufacturing plants that essentially charge everything we use now, from vehicles to our phones to our coffee makers, with the hope of those things being doled out and built in this country, at least in the coming years. Beyond that, next week already, we now know on the schedule there's a stop in Boston, a stop in Detroit for the auto show. Trying to go to places where he can rally the base, but then go to battleground states where they have competitive either governor, senate, or House races. There's a handful of House and a governor's race in Michigan that certainly would be seen as competitive by Democrats. And we'll continue to see him out there in that kind of fashion now with the 9 weeks to go. White House so far pretty pleased with how the last 2 weeks have gone and how his numbers are starting to turn around, because they get to talk about now the things that Congress and the White House accomplished this summer, and do it at a time when Americans are starting to pay more attention and prepare for the midterms.
But, Ed, even if the president and the White House feel good about what they've accomplished, if the president gets back out there, do Democrats want his endorsement?
There is that. And that is why he's not holding overt, explicit political campaign-style rallies or events. You notice, for example, when he was in Wisconsin on Labor Day, Mandela Barnes, the Senate candidate, did not appear with the president. He was up in Racine while the president was in Milwaukee. Yes, he met yesterday briefly in Pittsburgh with John Fetterman, the Senate candidate, but they've avoided each other a few times when the president's been in Pennsylvania. You're not going to see the president most likely going to campaign-style rallies until October. I think what they're trying to do here at the White House is get him out there in a more official capacity, maybe tack on a fundraiser, invite the candidates to sit in the audience kind of thing. But they're going to wait to see how polling looks in October, especially mid to late October, before you really start to see him go out there. If there's a race or parts of the country where it makes sense for him or the vice president or the first lady to go to help rally a candidate, they'll do that. And if there's something in the polling that says stay away, this is a president who is more keen than most to do that if necessary to help a Democrat win. He gets it. He's made that clear to his team. But in the meantime, you'll see him out there, again, 2 to 3 times a week is the plan now for the next several weeks.
And Siobhan, the Senate is back today after the August recess. What do lawmakers want to accomplish before they head out to campaign? And what are you hearing from both parties about the state of the race?
Well, the Senate Democrats come back with a very narrow agenda because they just accomplished most of their biggest agenda items this year, things like the CHIPS bill, coping with climate change, lowering prescription drug prices. And so now the focus is on keeping the government funded after September 30th, when current funding expires. In tandem with that, doing things like the permitting bill that was promised to Joe Manchin as a condition of his support for that big climate change bill. On top of that, there is another agenda for Senate Democrats, and that is confirming as many judges as they possibly can, kind of as a backstop in the event that they do not hold the Senate after the November elections. And after that, of course, it's all about campaigning, getting all of this stuff done so that they can turn their attention, both sides, to winning in November. There are some notable jitters on the Republican side after what they thought was a winning hand. You heard Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell spend much of August talking about how candidate quality matters. You're seeing a bit of a rift between the NRSC chairman, Rick Scott, and Mitch McConnell over candidate quality, over some financial difficulties that the NRSC is facing. And in fact, just a few moments ago, a bunch of us reporters were standing outside Mitch McConnell's office as a notably agitated Rick Scott marched in there. So we're all waiting to see whether they are able to sort out their differences in that meeting. But it's a combination of a very tense time politically and a time of a narrow agenda for the Democrats.
Yeah, and I guess dive a little deeper with that. I mean, how concerned, when you talk about these jitters, are Republicans in particular, given, some of these recent election forecasts? I mean, now we're seeing potentially the Senate could be a toss-up right now. What are you hearing from candidates and lawmakers about that when it comes to control of Congress?
Just the fact that this rip has spilled out into the open is an indicator. That tells you a whole lot, because it's a sign that people are already preparing themselves to play the blame game. We're also seeing, for example, the Republican candidate in Arizona, Blake Masters, acknowledging that abortion is going to become an issue and softening his position on abortion. And he's not the only Republican who is in that position. So if anybody is feeling a little bit on the downswing right now, it would be the Senate Republicans. On the other side, it looks like the House is still expected to stay in Republican hands. But again, that lead is narrowing. It is no longer the sure bet that it once seemed to be. And so that is the backdrop against which the Congress dives into its latest agenda items.
Yeah, and getting back to some of those Senate races, talk to us a little bit more about what's happening in Pennsylvania. I know that seems to be growing concerns that are being raised about Senate hopeful John Fetterman's health.
Well, that's exactly right. John Fetterman, having suffered a stroke, for the viewers who have been following this, does seem to be having some troubles communicating. It's a weakness. It's something that was addressed in a recent editorial by the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, in which it said that basically Mehmet Oz, however clumsily, had raised legitimate concerns about Mr. Fetterman's ability to serve in the Senate. It's certainly a concern for the Democrats, and I've reached out to the Fetterman campaign. I haven't yet had a response, which indicates that campaign isn't really certain how it wants to handle all of this.
And Ed, I know we're talking a lot about domestic politics, but turning to foreign policy now, President Biden says that he doesn't believe Russia should be branded as a state sponsor of terrorism. That is despite calls by Ukraine and even some members of Congress for the administration to make that type of designation. What is the president's rationale here?
It came up in all the White House, the State Department, and the national security briefings today with reporters. Why not was the question. And in essence, the answer is it wouldn't be seen as constructive or helpful at this time, given that there still are issues. Important to remember that the United States and Russia do have to talk to each other about, whether it's things like the space program or elements of logistics and deconflicting in Ukraine, in Syria, in other parts of the world. The Iranian nuclear talks, for example, is another place where the two sides might have to engage or have engaged, at least indirectly. And so the president just doesn't see that as a helpful or constructive move. Yes, Ukraine's president, in an interview with another American television network, has suggested that he's pushing the White House to do that. But the answer again today from officials and from the president last night as he got back here to the White House was not going to happen.
And then just very briefly, I know the president also spoke to the new UK Prime Minister, Liz Truss. How did that call go?
Well, the British have told us how it went. We still haven't heard from the White House, but they say that it was a good conversation and a chance for them to talk a bit about the enduring strength of the special relationship. They agreed that the partnership between the two countries, especially on issues related to the war in Ukraine, NATO, and the intelligence partnerships that the United States the United Kingdom, Australia have, for example, are important and must continue. That's notable for a now prime minister who once questioned whether this was really the most special relationship that the UK has, or whether it should try to take a more even hand with the Americans. No word on whether these two will meet in person at some point soon, whether it'll be a special visit, whether it'll be at the United Nations General Assembly meetings later this month. But the president had signaled he was happy to have this conversation with her today. Liz Truss now the third woman and the 15th prime minister summoned to the Queen to form a government. So we'll see where that relationship goes.
All right, Ed O'Keefe and Siobhan Hughes, thanks so much.